What's your dowry? Sentiment and hope. My father-in-law laughed at our first meeting. I won't bless this marriage. I told my father everything. Next time, I'm going with you, he insisted. But when my father-in-law saw my father walk into the room, he turned pale and started to stutter. My name is Allison. I'm 28, working in general administration at a logistics firm in Boston. It's not glamorous, but I like structure and planning. It suits me. I met Evan in college. He's 2 years older, thoughtful, mellow, the kind of guy who prefers listening to speaking. We started dating after a study group turned into late-night walks. 8 years later, we were still together, still camping every fall like we used to in school. It was during one of those trips, just us, a fire, and the smell of pine, that Evan proposed. No flash mobs, no photographers, no champagne. Just Evan awkwardly fishing a small box from his jacket while I held a mug of hot cider. I figured this was our kind of place, he said. Inside was a simple ring. He didn't even kneel, just handed it to me like a passing thought. I laughed and said yes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was us. A week later, Evan offered to come meet my parents officially. It's only right, he said, nervously straightening his shirt. They raised the woman I'm going to marry. I smiled. You'll be fine. Just be yourself. We drove to my parents' house in Cambridge, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood with old brick homes. Nothing fancy, but warm and familiar. My dad retired from the Air Force years ago and launched his own aerospace logistics company. He doesn't talk about it much, but I know he built it from the ground up and works long hours. My mom tends the garden and cooks like she's feeding an army. They're not wealthy by elite standards, but they've always made enough to give me a good life and a sense of pride. When we arrived, both of them came to the door. My dad gave Evan a firm handshake. My mom offered him homemade apple pie before he even took off his shoes. Dinner was relaxed, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the kind of conversation that's more teasing than formal. Evan fit in easily, even helping clear the dishes without being asked. Later that night, my mom called Evan's parents to thank them and let them know we'd offered Evan to stay the night since he'd had a drink. I was in the kitchen when I heard her tone change. Oh no, of course. There's no expectation, she said tightly. We just thought, well, no, we're not charging anyone, sir. I peeked around the corner. She looked stunned. My dad set down his glass. She hung up and turned to us slowly. That was Evan's father. Evan froze. What did he say? He said he doesn't let his son stay at strangers' homes without understanding the potential cost, as in financial cost. Her voice cracked slightly. He said people often offer things and then later send the bill. Evan looked mortified. I'm sorry. He's been scammed before. I think he... My dad raised a hand. No need to explain. But I wasn't as forgiving. So, he thinks we're trying to shake him down? Because we made you dinner and offered you the guest room? Evan rubbed the back of his neck. He doesn't know you. He doesn't want to. We didn't talk much more that evening. Evan left, and I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my stomach tight. A few days later, Evan texted, I know it was awful, but I want you to meet them. Maybe it'll help if they know you better. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part, though, wanted to fight for us. I agreed. Evan picked me up the following weekend. His parents lived in a massive modern home in a private community near Weston. Glass walls, stone accents, the kind of place that whispers legacy wealth. Don't be nervous, Evan said as we parked. They can be intense, but I'll be right there. The door was opened by a maid. Evan's mother, Susan, greeted me politely. Thin, elegant, cool as marble. Welcome, Allison. Thank you for coming. I nodded. Thank you for having me. She led me into a sleek, open-concept living room. A man sat at the center, legs crossed, posture perfect. Lawrence. His reputation preceded him, CEO of a major manufacturing company, Forbes mentions, keynote speeches. And here I was, daughter of a former colonel and owner of a niche aerospace firm most people hadn't heard of. Allison, he said without rising. Have a seat. I sat across from him. Evan sat beside me, tense. I'll get to the point, Lawrence said. Why do you want to marry my son? I blinked. Because I love him. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm sure. But you must understand, I've worked my whole life to give Evan a certain kind of life. Access, status, security. and I've seen too many people latch on to that out of convenience. My chest tightened. "Excuse me? What do your parents do?" he asked, as if that were somehow a logical next step. "My dad's retired military. He owns a logistics company. My mom stays home." He nodded slowly. "So, limited assets." I stiffened. "We're not wealthy, but they gave me everything I needed and taught me not to measure people by net worth." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "Spoken like someone who never had it." Evan spoke up. "Dad, that's enough?" But Lawrence didn't stop. "You're in general administration, correct? Modest career, modest income. Do you honestly believe this marriage would be equal?" I leaned forward. "I'm not marrying Evan for his bank account. And if you honestly think that's all I care about, then I have no interest in convincing you otherwise." Lawrence tilted his head. "So you admit the financial gap?" "I acknowledge it," I said, "and I reject the idea that it defines worth." Susan shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Lawrence leaned back. "Well, that's very noble. But I don't believe in fairy tales, so unless you can offer something beyond vague ideals, I can't support this union." I stood. "Then don't." "Allison," Evan started. I turned. "If your father can't see beyond numbers, I'm not sure I want his approval. And if you can't stand up to him, I'm not sure we're ready." I left the house without looking back. Later that night, at home, I told my parents everything. My dad listened in silence. My mom tried to stay calm but ended up slamming the dish towel on the counter. "That arrogant son of a—" "Lawrence," I said. "His name is Lawrence." My dad furrowed his brow. "Lawrence. Weston Manufacturing? You know him?" He didn't answer. He got up and walked into his office. A few minutes later, he came back holding an old Air Force photo. He stared at it, then chuckled darkly. "I knew I recognized that name." I blinked. "What?" "I trained that man. 25 years ago. Arrogant then, too." "What are you saying?" He looked at me and smiled. "Call Evan. Tell him I'll come to the next meeting, but I'll be a little late." The week that followed was a strange mix of dread and anticipation. I went to work, answered emails, filled spreadsheets, but my mind kept drifting to that living room, to Lawrence's smirk and Susan's silence, and to my father's quiet, simmering certainty. He hadn't elaborated, and I hadn't asked. But something about the way he looked at that photo told me he hadn't forgotten a single detail. He wasn't just angry, he was ready. Evan texted midweek. "My parents agreed to a second meeting. Just you this time, not your mom and dad. At least not yet. They said they'd give you another chance to clarify your intentions." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering. "Another chance?" I typed back. "I'll come. But after that, I'm bringing my father." He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, it was short. "Understood. Saturday afternoon, cloudless sky. I wore a dark green blouse and simple black slacks. Not flashy, not plain. Just me." As Evan drove us back to Weston, I stared out the window, steadying my breath. "I'll stay with you the whole time," he said quietly. "I promise." We pulled into the driveway. The lawn looked sharper than I remembered. Even the hedges seemed judgmental. Susan greeted me again, her smile tight. "Allison." "Welcome back." I followed her into the same living room. Lawrence was seated like a monarch, waiting for trial to begin. "Let's begin then," he said before I even sat down. Evan took a chair beside me, but I could feel his tension like static. Lawrence steepled his fingers. "You walked out last time." "I trust you've reconsidered your approach." "I have," I said calmly. "I've also spoken to my father." Lawrence blinked, clearly unimpressed. And I'd like to clarify a few things about who I am and who my family is." Lawrence gestured. "By all means. I'm not rich. My parents aren't either, at least not by your standards. But they're decent people who worked hard their whole lives. My dad served this country. He now owns a logistics company that supplies components to aerospace and defense manufacturers. He built it from nothing." He shrugged. "That's admirable, but it doesn't change the fact that you come from a lower financial tier. That disparity matters." Susan opened her mouth as if to intervene, but stayed quiet. I clenched my hands in my lap. "Why does it matter? Evan and I love each other." Lawrence let out a short laugh. "Love is sweet, but money is structure. It determines how conflict is handled, how family is supported, how children are raised." Evan cut in. "Dad!" Lawrence waved him off. I'm speaking. He turned to me again. Let me ask plainly. Do you expect Evan to support your parents when they age? Or your future children? What assets will you bring into this family? I stared at him. I bring character, resilience, stability. The kind of backbone money can't buy. Lawrence's eyes narrowed. So nothing tangible. Is that all that matters to you? It's what ensures balance. Without it, resentment builds. My answer hasn't changed. I won't bless this marriage. Evan stood up. Then maybe your blessing isn't required. Lawrence looked genuinely stunned. What did you just say? You've done nothing but insult the woman I love and her family. I'm done sitting through it. Susan touched his arm, but Lawrence shook her off. If you leave this house with her, you'll forfeit your inheritance. Your trust, your shares, your stake in the company. I don't want your money, Evan said. I want Allison. The room went still. Lawrence stood. Then get out. I took Evan's hand and walked to the door with him, heart pounding. As we reached the foyer, I turned back. One more thing, I said. You said I have nothing tangible. You might want to look into who supplies your newest production line's navigation components. Lawrence froze. I smiled coldly. We'll be back. With my father, Evan and I left in silence. When we got home, I told my parents everything, word for word. My mother was livid. He threatened you? Disowned his own son? My father just nodded. It's worse than I thought. What do you mean? I asked. He stood up. Lawrence has always measured people by rank and bank accounts. Even when he was in the Air Force, he'd look down on enlisted men. When I trained him, he was cocky and insubordinate, but he fell in line when it mattered. I blinked. You trained him? Yes, my father said. I was his commanding officer. And I don't forget who tries to step on people to feel tall. I glanced at my mother. Her mouth was open slightly. My father continued. I haven't used any connections in years, but in this case, I'm making an exception. He walked into his office, pulled out an old green file box, and retrieved a folder stamped with military insignia. What is that? I asked. His personnel record, he said. We keep copies for certain officers. Just in case I suddenly felt a chill. You're serious about this? I don't play power games, he said. But if that man wants to measure status, I'll show him status. The following day, I contacted Evan. We're coming. Just tell your parents to be home Saturday afternoon. My dad says he'll be a little late, so let me go in first. Evan replied. Are you sure? More than ever. The rest of the week passed in slow, grinding suspense. My father said little, but I could feel the shift in his energy. Calm, contained, but focused like a man preparing for a mission. My mother was oddly giddy, like she already knew what would happen and was just waiting for it to unfold. Saturday arrived. I wore navy, no jewelry, my hair pinned up. I wanted to look simple, direct, and composed. Evan picked me up early. He looked as tense as I felt. We didn't talk much on the drive. When we arrived, Susan greeted me first, warmer than before. Allison, she said, we're expecting your father today? Yes, I said. He'll be here shortly. She led me inside. Lawrence was waiting, again in that same chair, with that same dismissive posture. He glanced at his watch. Still playing the late arrival card, I see? I smiled. He'll be here. Lawrence chuckled. Well, I hope he's not expecting the valet to park a rusty pickup. The driveway's for residents only. Evan flinched, but I stayed silent. I'd never wanted to punch someone more in my life. Then the doorbell rang. Susan walked to the door and opened it. A voice rang out, warm and calm. Good afternoon. Sorry to keep you waiting. I heard the door shut, and my father's footsteps, measured and steady, entered the house. The moment my father stepped into the room, Lawrence's smirk faltered. Stephen, Susan said, startled but smiling. It's lovely to meet you. Likewise, my father replied, his voice calm but crisp. Thank you for hosting my daughter. I apologize for being late. Wanted to let her speak first. Susan gestured toward the living room. Please, have a seat. He gave her a courteous nod and turned to Lawrence. Lawrence. Been a while. Lawrence slowly rose from his chair, his eyes flicking between recognition and disbelief. Stephen. Colonel Reynolds? Retired now, my father said casually. But yes. They stared at each other for a second. For the first time in both meetings, Lawrence didn't look in control. I didn't realize Allison was your daughter, he said, voice tightening. That much is obvious, my father replied. I don't usually get involved in my daughter's relationships. But when I hear that a man called my family beggars, well, I tend to make exceptions. Susan looked between them, visibly confused. Evan sat frozen. Lawrence gestured stiffly. Let's not drag up old history. History has a funny way of showing up at your door, my father said. You remember the 42nd Logistics Detachment? The one you almost got kicked out of for insubordination? Lawrence flushed. That was years ago. Right. And now you're the CEO of a company that depends on aerospace navigation units sourced through Star Aero Logistics. Lawrence's eyes narrowed. That's your company? My father raised an eyebrow. I founded it 15 years ago. We're currently listed as a Tier 1 supplier for 3 of your subsidiaries. Susan gasped softly. And just to clarify, my father continued, when you told my daughter she came from a family with nothing tangible, you were talking about the company that delivers 40% of the modules for your Eastern plant's new line of electric transport cranes. Lawrence sat down slowly. I didn't know. You didn't ask, my father said, because you assumed. About me, about my daughter, about her intentions. He leaned forward slightly. You see, Lawrence, I don't care that you're wealthy or powerful, but I do care when someone talks down to my kid after building their life on principles I taught them. I felt my chest tighten with something I hadn't felt since childhood. Awe. My father wasn't loud. He didn't raise his voice, but the room belonged to him now. Lawrence looked down. I may have spoken out of turn. You did more than that, my father said. You disrespected my wife. You judged my daughter based on her tax bracket. And you told your son that love was meaningless if it didn't come with stocks and inheritance. There was a long silence. Then Evan stood. He's right, Evan said. Allison is more than enough. She's been enough from the start. And if choosing her means walking away from everything else, I'll do it. Susan turned sharply to her husband. Are you really going to lose your son over this? Lawrence didn't answer. He stared at the carpet as if it had betrayed him. My father straightened. Look, I didn't come here to swing power around. I came here to remind you that respect isn't earned by wealth. It's earned by how you treat people who have less than you. He turned to me. Allison, are you sure? I nodded. I love him. And I'm not afraid of where he comes from. I'm afraid of becoming someone like him. My father gave a quiet nod and looked back at Lawrence. So, are you going to be the kind of man who learns, or the kind who doubles down? Lawrence looked up slowly. For a flicker of a second, I thought he'd say something cruel. But he didn't. He rose, stepped forward, and gave a small, stiff bow, not out of grace, but obligation. You have my apology, he said, and my blessing. My father didn't react. She doesn't need your blessing. But I'm glad you've learned something. We left shortly after. No champagne, no handshake between the men, just silence, loaded and complex. The wedding happened 3 months later, in a garden behind a historic inn outside Boston. My father wore a simple navy suit. Susan wore lavender. Lawrence stood off to the side, stiff but silent. But what stole the show were my father's guests. At least 10 of his old Air Force colleagues showed up, some in dress uniforms, others in wrinkled blazers. During the reception, they made my father stand up and join them for a logistics corps roll call, complete with military marching chants and inside jokes about flight manifests and airbase pranks. The guests were in tears laughing. Even Lawrence cracked a smile, brief but real. At one point, one of the retired generals clapped Lawrence on the back and said, "He ever tell you how he saved our fuel shipment during that blackout in 2007? Genius under pressure." Lawrence shook his head, and for the first time that weekend, looked genuinely humbled. These days, Evan and I live in a modest house in Somerville. 2 bedrooms, 1 child on the way. I still work in administration. Evan left his father's company and started a consulting firm for small manufacturers. We're not rich, but we're building something real, on our terms. And whenever my father visits, Evan always greets him the same way, "Sir." It's half respect, half running joke. But every time, my dad winks and replies, "Relax. I'm just the guy who trained your father-in-law." And honestly, that's more satisfying than any blessing could ever be.